Smarties, today we are completing our three-part trio where we answer our final round of frequently asked questions. In episode 304, which aired 2 weeks ago, we tackled digital age questions. In last week's episode 305, we tackled parenting questions. And today we are going to respond to frequently asked school-related questions, including why things seem harder than it used to be, focus questions, challenging school communication, how to set realistic expectations, and those big educational therapy questions like when can we scale back from sessions. If you are interested in working with us, please don't hesitate to sign up for a phone call. My practice is Kapp Educational Therapy Group located in Beverly Hills, California, and virtually everywhere. We specialize in learners who struggle with executive functioning skills challenges, 5th grade through adulthood. And you can sign up for a phone call at www.kappedtherapy.com. And Steph's practice is in Redondo Beach, California, and Manhattan Beach, California, and virtually everywhere. Her practice does all the things, and you can sign up for a phone call on her website, which is www.myedtherapist.com. Let's dig in.
You want to learn faster, but sometimes working harder is just not the answer. You have to learn smarter. The Educational Therapy Podcast.
Hi, Smarties. Welcome to episode 306 of Learn Smarter, the Educational Therapy Podcast. I'm Stephanie Pitts.
And I'm Rachel Kapp.
And today we are on episode 3 of our frequently asked questions to talk about school-related questions.
Our triad, if you will.
Yes.
And if you haven't listened to those previous episodes, of course, we've linked them for you in the show notes, but they were just last week and the previous week, the week before that.
Yeah.
So go ahead and scroll back, and you don't need to listen to these in order. That's one of the beauties, really, of our podcast. Most of the time, you don't need to listen to episodes in order.
Yeah, I like that. All right. So let's talk about things that come up. These are questions that have come up with our team members, within our practices, things that we're noticing. So that's where these questions are coming from. So let's dig in and talk about them. Mm-hmm. So the first one is, they were doing so well until ... What happened? This is a biggie.
So in my practice, where we specialize in learners with executive functioning skills challenges, I can almost guarantee if a family is calling with a middle school learner that they were doing fine in elementary school. They had no concerns. Assignments were being turned in. Teachers weren't reporting anything. And that's when they say to me, Rachel, they were doing so well until ... And that is because at a certain point, executive functioning skills challenges can really, really emerge in that transition, usually into middle school, sometimes in the transition from middle school into high school. And the expectations really level up. And when you have a bright kid who doesn't have compensatory strategies, this is really typical of learners who over-rely on their memory. Mm-hmm. These challenges emerge, and parents and teachers in schools can sort of be surprised, but also the learners themselves are often very surprised by this.
Oh, yeah. And I want to add in there that I have been seeing this a lot with 10th graders.
Yeah, that makes total sense.
In particular, I think there's a couple reasons for this. We're recording this in March of 2024. So if you're listening to this later, it might not always apply, but I think there's a couple of reasons why the 10th grade is happening. And I want to talk about that because it's been happening a lot. One of the reasons for these current 10th graders is, number one, COVID. So it's like the 9th and 10th graders that were in middle school during COVID. And so they didn't get to practice the up-leveling of the strategies in the executive functioning. And so now they're falling apart.
Totally.
So I think one of the things that we have to remember is whatever grade your learner is in today, they are not at the same place that the previous set of prior to COVID, that grade, were at. They are not in the same place. 9th and 10th graders today are not the same as 9th and 10th graders prior to COVID.
Say that again, because I think it's really important that you can't have a direct comparison. So if you have a learner, let's say you have a kid in your household, you had a 10th grader in 2016, and then you have a 10th grader now, it's going to be very different. That COVID impact is still being seen and felt.
It's being felt so much. So 9th and 10th graders today are not the same as 9th and 10th graders prior to COVID. We need to take a step back for a second and realize that. I think the reason it's happening in 10th grade and not as much in 9th grade is, they'll figure it out. 9th grade is just harder than it was in 8th grade.
There's more grace and understanding.
100%.
And less observation of this as something to be addressed or a pattern.
Or they started out the first half of 9th grade strong and they were fine. It wasn't until second semester of 9th grade that things started to do a nosedive. And that's because they've run out of gas and they're getting burnt out. So that's why we get these second semester situations over and over and over again. Or they were fine until they didn't struggle in elementary school. They didn't struggle in middle school because middle school was during COVID. So they still never learned the strategies that perhaps they would have fallen apart sooner if it weren't for COVID. So I think that that's something to be said. The other place that things are falling apart are 3rd graders.
Okay, talk about it, Steph.
3rd graders are falling apart. They're finding out that they are really kindergarten, 1st grade level of reading. Why? Because of COVID. Because those early developmental years where they're starting to learn some of the basics of reading were during COVID. And so now I am getting call after call after call of around that age, and the kids are 1 to 2 grades behind in reading because they're not where they would have been if they had been in school daily. And I think that that's also very important to note because at 3rd to 4th grade is where it changes from learning to read to reading to learn, and that's why it's coming out. So I think we need to take a second to sit there and figure out, okay, these are real things that are happening outside of your individual learner, and they are adapting, and we're all adapting. And so that's why everything was fine until, because it's very easy to sit there and say, but it was just fine. But if we look at today, now it's not. And that's okay. And there's not going to always be a answer to why that happened in that scenario or that age for your particular learner. Just recognizing that it's happening, I think, is important.
So the next question is, how do you get the student to focus during session versus the teacher who's struggling to get the learner to focus during class? Okay, so we get this a lot because we're both virtual. In my practice, we're working exclusively with kids with executive functioning skills challenges, and often that means attentional challenges as well. So this is like something I discuss on every single call.
Yep.
There's a lot of different reasons that we're able to sort of quote unquote get kids.
Yeah.
The first is it's simply one-on-one.
That is a game changer in general.
There's a rapport that we have. It's interactive. It's not serious. All the time, it doesn't have a serious undertone in our sessions. It can be fun, and it usually is fun. And if you're not having fun with your learners in session, that's definitely something that you can reach out to Steph and I about coaching, because you should be having fun in session. And it is extremely personalized to their own experience. Most learners recognize within a month of starting sessions that this is mitigating anxiety. This is helping them improve in areas that they didn't even have language about improving in before. They didn't even know the words or really what the problem was. It is reaffirming self-esteem. And this is all those things that can happen in the one-on-one. We're addressing the challenges or the things that feel difficult so that when they are in the classroom environment, hopefully they have some prior experience with the information and they feel affirmed in their own knowledge. But Steph, what would you add on this?
I was going to also say, sometimes you have to look at helping them understand why they're losing focus, what it is that is making them distracted or they don't want to pay attention, right? And so then it's also
that opportunity to get curious.
Yeah. And it's also thinking about helping them figure out what to do when they don't know what to do. So it's recovering after they have spaced out in class, let's say, and they didn't hear the assignment or they didn't hear what they're supposed to be doing, what do you do? What do you do when you don't know what to do? And I think the beauty of having an educational therapist is that we are explicitly talking about those things. And when you learn how to self-advocate and you learn what to do and how to handle situations, this is going to come up in their daily lives forever. So I think it's really important to note that it's like having a coach, right? Mm-hmm. Every amazing sports player has a coach because you can't look at yourself and know what you need to change in order to make it better. So sometimes it's just that. So let's go on to the next one.
It perfectly segues into the next one, which is how much support is necessary before it becomes enabling. So there's a couple different ways to interpret this question. If you are providing a lot of support to your learner before they start sessions, let's segment. Let's talk about before sessions are started, and then what should happen once a learner is in intervention with our practices. Mm-hmm. So this is often a signal to parents that it might be time to do something more. Mm-hmm. They are functioning as their child's total support system. They're the ones going in the portal. They're the ones doing the communication. They're the ones sitting with the learner, helping them do their homework. By the way, almost every other conversation I have, a parent will admit that they are doing the homework mm-hmm. for their learner. So like if that's happening in your home, just know that that's a universal experience and we hear it a lot. So that's a signal that you might need some help stepping back, which would lead us into the second half of how I would think about this question, which is in session. It's one of the reasons we recommend twice a week sessions if time permissible and financially feasible, because twice a week is a beautiful way of allowing enough support, but also giving space. When you have somebody from our practices working with your learner, we are helping you structure the learner in a way that allows you as the parent to step back and them as learner to step forward. Which means it's going to feel like 2 steps forward, 1 step back. It's going to mean that there's some failing forward happening. And it's going to mean that you have partnership with your learner, with your clinician. So you feel like they're backed up, but there's still space for the learner to have some more independence and autonomy outside of you. So it's a very nuanced question.
Yeah, it is. And I want to just sort of add that if you're scaffolding things and support is being taken back, and it might be at different paces, but if there is no change and it keeps going at the same way, the same support, then that's something you got to look at.
Something to examine.
Sometimes it does take months or even years, but it really all depends on the learner.
Absolutely. So Steph, what's the next question? And I want to hear your answer to this.
Okay. So the learner is saying one thing is going on in the classroom or going on with homework or going on in general, and the teacher might be unable to answer or communicate, or you haven't heard, or they're too busy, or whatever it is. But there's a disjointedness of what's happening, right? So the narratives from the learner versus what might come from the teacher or not is causing conflict at home. And this is when you're knee deep in it. And this is one of those examples of if you don't have an educational therapist, this is a really good time to get one because you want to preserve the parent-child relationship. I think there's always one person's side of the story, the other person's side of the story, and the truth is somewhere in the middle. And depending on the situation, it could very much be that that is how the learner is interpreting things and doesn't mean that it was any ill intention on the teacher's side. But I think it's really important to understand that if these sorts of things are coming between you and your child, you need to take a step back. And this is the time to get an educational therapist.
I love that your answer to like, who do you believe is get another person in there to help you negotiate this and work through it and have that professional collaboration. It can be really difficult, especially when your kid is not an accurate reporter, or sometimes when they're not being an accurate reporter, they absolutely believe what they're telling you.
100%.
They're convinced.
It's not ill-intentioned and it's not an outright lie. Most often, it is their truth.
So that's just something that parents have to keep top of mind. But that question is kind of a sign that larger exploration needs to happen, and perhaps bringing in somebody highly skilled in this scenario will help mitigate things. Okay, Steph, let's talk about the next question. You want to read it?
What are realistic expectations for my kid given their XYZ diagnosis?
Or behavior. Not all kids that we work with have a diagnosis, right?
Given any XYZ. It could be given they're in 10th grade. It doesn't matter what it is. It's whatever situation you are in. So what are the realistic expectations?
Okay, so what I love about this question is maybe 3 months ago, Steph came to me and said, Rach, I really think we should do an episode of like, what are the realistic expectations at every grade? And we had a long conversation about it. And what we ultimately decided was we had to be more wishy-washy about it.
Yeah.
We couldn't come in and say, okay, they should be doing
XYZ. Yeah.
And it's just not possible. And if you want to look at what, grade level expectations are, there's lots of wonderful standards and measurements out there. That's a Googleable thing.
A Googleable.
A Googleable. TM, trademark that.
Yeah, it's good.
For our purposes, realistic expectations, I think, have to live within the zone of productivity.
Yes.
That zone of productive struggle. And so that zone of productive struggle is something that we talked about with Rishi Sriram on an episode that we'll link in the show notes. And that idea of productive struggle is a level that is uncomfortable for them, but realistically attained. Let's just give like a very baseline example. You have a kid who is writing a 5-sentence paragraph, which is standard of expectation in something like elementary school. But then they're a couple grades higher, they're in middle school, but that teacher or that parent, for example, wants them to move from a 5-sentence paragraph to a 5-page paper. That is not in the zone of productive struggle. And so that would not be a realistic expectation at that point. But figuring that out can be tricky. Steph, what would you add?
I think the expectations really need to fall in the where have they been and where are they going?
Totally.
And that is the answer.
Yep.
And if you want to talk more about it, we're here. You can contact me at my practice, my ed therapist, or Rach's practice, Kapp Ed Therapy. So it's so individualized and everybody's running their own race. You can't quantify it. So get curious.
I like it.
All right, next question.
The next question is, they're doing well on homework assignments, but failing tests. Where is the disconnect? Why is this happening?
I feel like this is my clients in general. It feels like this is what I'm starting to...
This is how these episodes emerge. We feel themes. We see themes from our team. We talk to each other. We're like, okay, this is where the episode is at.
This seems to be what I'm starting to specialize in. I don't know how that happened, but it seems to be a lot of what's going on.
They are doing well on the things that are untimed, not high pressure, because homework is untimed. It's not high pressure. It can be very rote.
Yeah.
But they're not showing their knowledge appropriately on the test. And I think I just outlined 3 different ways that a test is different from homework.
Yes.
It's timed, it's pressure, it's likely not rote. So that's 3 explanations right there. But Steph, what would you add?
So I think the disconnect also needs to be talked about, where it's those differences that Rach mentioned, but also we're talking about a huge difference in how they're producing knowledge. And so when we think about grades, and grades are, can you produce what the teacher wants, when the teacher wants it, and how the teacher wants it? And if you can't do all 3 of those things simultaneously, you're going to fail the test. So that's a really big thing to look at as far as how they're approaching tests, studying, actually taking it, etc.
All right. The next question is students who don't get physical things. So these are the kids who everything that they have to do is digital. What is a helpful digital organization tool? I don't even like the question.
I don't really like the question either.
It's not even about what tool you pick. Whatever tool you pick is what you stick with.
Yeah.
And that becomes the rule. So the question isn't about what, it's about how you make it simple, maintainable, and realistic for that learner to update. And so what are the rules around it? This is where we shine as educational therapists. My practice, this is one of the first things everybody is doing is creating their rules around their systems. So this is where we shine. And this is how we help learners sort of make decisions and just we hold them accountable to them.
Yeah.
And simplification is key.
Yeah.
With all systems.
And learning how to maintain. That's important.
And also not having an expectation that just because you pick the system, you create the system, you create rules around the system, that they are going to independently maintain the system, because they're probably not.
They're 100% not.
Right. I didn't want to be that forceful, but they're not. We have no expectation that they're going to independently maintain those systems, guys.
It's exciting when they do, but
it doesn't happen.
Yeah.
It doesn't happen for months and months and months. So
exactly.
We both decide we reject the premise of the question.
Yep.
And sometimes we need to be asking the right, better questions. Okay. Last question.
So changing from twice to once a week or graduating out before they're ready?
Okay, so that question is, when should learners be going from 2 sessions a week to 1?
Yes.
We'll be clear, not every learner in our practice is doing that.
Yeah.
Not every learner in our practice is twice a week. We prefer it because we think more meaningful change will happen consistently and faster with twice a week sessions, but it's not a necessity.
Yes, and I want to say it is absolutely important that we talk about graduating out as well, even twice a week or once a week. If your learners in educational therapy, that we do graduate them out. If you have a learner that wants to be done and says, I've got this, and time again, I've seen this many, many times, they're not ready. Sometimes you have to let them go out and try it and let them fail. In order for them to see that they need a little bit more support still. They still have some more learning to do. And that's okay.
For those kids who want to pause because they feel like they have it, sometimes we have to allow that failing forward. For others, you want to make sure that certain goals have reached autonomy and independence. And that's nuanced for each learner. So that's what we got for you today, Smarties.
Hope it was helpful and meaningful and that it made you think a little bit.
Yeah, we dug into a lot in these last 3 episodes. So have a great week, Smarties.
Have a great week.